Hello, my name is Aaron,
And my name is Amelia.
and we're going to give a introductory presentation on how to use Microsoft SQL Server 2014. So let's get started. Okay, so our first topic is going to be how to log in and connect to SQL Server. Now our tutorial is going to assume you've already installed SQL Server on your machine. If you need help, there are plenty of tutorials online to do that. So to connect to SQL Server, so when you first log in, open Microsoft SQL Server, it will give you a window that will ask you for some information. And you have to select the server type, server name, and authentication. And just leave server type alone for now. And in server name, you will need to select the name of your computer to begin with. And later on, if you're going to connect with a remote server, you have to type in part of that server's connection string. But for now, just select the default that you set up when you installed it, which should be your computer name. And then for authentication modes, there are two primary forms: Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. Windows authentication is just a good default for now. It works well on your individual machine, and it works if you don't need individual user accounts. SQL Server authentication is needed if you're connecting with a password, and if you're doing any kind of remote connection, then you definitely need to use SQL Server authentication. And so I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like real quick. And so I'm already connected, so I'm going to disconnect the Object Explorer. So this is the window, and here are the different servers I've used recently. This one is my local machine. Now I can use this SQL Server authentication or Windows. I'm just going to use Windows because it's simple. So connect, and this just once again explains the differences between Windows authentication versus SQL Server authentication. Alright, topic 2, reasons to use a database management system. And so this is really discussing the differences between using something like Microsoft SQL Server versus just having your code executing queries and running everything separate from it. And so basically you have easy access to a lot of the options of your database, such as changing settings and easily creating tables and viewing the data. There's lots of online tutorials for basic tasks, troubleshooting. It's easy to tweak a value or property. We're going to show you later how to set things like auto increment and index and other values, and it's an easy way, kind of as a process of discovery, to learn how different database management systems work. Because if you're used to MySQL and you're moving over to SQL Server, the syntax for things is a little different where things are, so it's a good way to discover it. It's also easy to rebuild your assets with scripts. If you are refactoring things or you screw up your database with a bad query, you can have a saved script that you've made, copy and paste it into a query window, and then execute it, and it will rebuild everything for you. And this last one, it's kind of cop-out, but if you don't know SQL yet, or if you're uncomfortable with it, you can avoid it somewhat by using some of the built-in properties here as you're learning, so that makes it helpful. Alright, so our next topic is how to create a new database.
So the first thing you want to do is, in the database drop-down table, you're going to want to hit right-click and hit New Database. You can name it whatever you want, preferably something so that you know what it is when you go find it. Something simple as our tutorial. And so you just hit OK. And then it won't show up at first most of the time, so you're going to have to refresh the screen, which you can do by right-clicking Database again and hitting refresh. You're going to need to use the refresh button a lot, and so it should show up right there. And then if you want to view the script, you can just right-click that database and hit Create Script Database As, Create To, and New Query Window, which opens up this window, which has all the script that this database has in it so far, which I believe most of this we've discovered is unnecessary, but some of it is. So then once you have your database set up, our next topic is you're going to want to create a new table. So on our tutorial, you expand the menu by hitting the plus, and then under Tables, right-click and say New Table. And then the table menu will pop up. It'll give you options for things like the column name. So if you're doing, say, a student database, you can do student ID, and then it asks you what the data type is. So student ID would probably be an int, and if you're setting this as the primary key, you want to get rid of the nulls. So you just go through and set various fields, so first name, last name, etc. And then once you're done with that, you can set one to be the primary key. So if you want the student ID, we're going to fill in the table quick. So say all we want is first name, last name. So when you want to set something as the primary key, you right click and say set primary key. And then it'll put a little key icon next to that field, thus telling you that this is the primary key. And then there's settings down below that you can change if you want to give it a default value or a binding value. So if we wanted the default value to be like 0, then you can go in and change it later. So in the column properties, you can do things such as set a default value or auto increment, and the auto increment you go into identity specification and double click on is identity, and that'll change it between auto increment or no auto increment. And then once again, once you've set all your values and given the table a name, which you can do in
When you save the file, you have to enter
saving
a name.
the file makes you enter a name. So you can call it student. And then refresh the table, refresh your tables view, because you're going to find it doesn't like to, well, sometimes it'll show up, but most of the time it doesn't like to show up. And then once again, you can right click, say view script table as, create to, and new query editor window. And then it'll just pop up with the script, and it shows you things such as their identity or their student ID field, the first name field, the last name field, which ones can be null, which ones can't be null, if they have incrementation, if they have a primary or a default value, etc.
Okay, so for topic 5, we're going to be adding entries in a table. So the first thing we need to do is open the table view. So right click on dbo.student and click edit top 200 rows. And this is just a form that lets you add new values. And so we can type in values for the fields of the entry. So we'll do first and last name. And in our example, we don't have any fields that are not allowed null values that are set by the user. But if we did, then it would have error checking in here, and it would report to you it couldn't add the entry. But we can also choose not to pass a value. For instance, we can add one that only has a first name, and then the last name will remain null until it is updated later. And so that is important to know about. And once again, since the field ID is auto-incremented, we can leave it empty. And you don't have to save your work here. It'll either be committed or not. And so this just will execute an insert query every time you finish a row. So the next thing what we want to show you is how to insert data with a script. And so you'll right click on student, go to script table as, insert to, new query editor window. And this is a general form for inserting data into the database with a script. And so you can see it has insert into student, and then what rows you're inserting to, and then under values you type in the literal values. So we can replace first name varchar 50 with in single quotes. You can put in a value. Okay, and then once you're done typing in the values, press execute, and it will say one row affected and query executed successfully. So now we can go and view the entries in the table. We can view entries in the table, just select top 1,000 views, and we can see Barack Obama was added as the 4th entry. And so Those scripts are a really easy way because you can just redo the values and submit it. And no matter what kind of system you're writing, if you're using different languages, you can use as scripts and change the values, and it's really easy to add data. So our final topic will be running SQL statements and scripts. And so we will begin by opening a new query on our database, our tutorial.
Which opens the query window, which we've opened in the past. However, this one is a blank query, so you can search for whatever it is you want to search for.
Yep, so in here we can just type in any valid SQL statement, and it will return the results in the window. So we'll do a select statement.
Then you hit execute to run your select, and it'll show up down at the bottom with whatever it was you were asking for. So in this case, we were asking it to show us everyone from student. You can do a specified value where you could say where the last name, I can't spell, where the last name equals, say, in single quotes. So you can choose if you want all the people whose last name are Carson, and we only have the one, so it'll just pop up with the one value.
And then the next thing that we can show you is how to create a new table using the script generator that SQL Server has. So if we right-click on our student table and do script table as create to new editor window, now we have the script to create student, but we could just change some of the values and add or remove rows and create a new entity this way. So we're going to create a class ID. Student will be enrolled in classes, so we'll just change some of the names, and you can leave the other entities, the other values the same. You can add more rows of different types, and it becomes a really easy way to create new tables. And as you can see, we need to change a couple values. They have, in SQL Server, they have the primary key, pk_class needs to be changed, and some other values in there. But once you do all that, if you have all the rows you want, you can just press execute and it will run. And there's an example of setting a required field.
So then if you refresh your tables, you should see a class database table pop up. Which if we go and say edit top 200 rows, you'll see it's got the class ID, course name, and professor, which were fields we set.
Yep, so now you know a little bit about how to use the basics of SQL Server, and hopefully this will help you if you're using it on a project. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. I don't know how to stop
so
this.
We go on my little thing there and click on that and go stop.